#idataengineer.
My name is Daniel. Some call me the Data Janitor, and I'm building Pipeline Data Engineering Academy, the world's first data engineering bootcamp. Not one of today's data engineers grew up as a kid imagining becoming one. I definitely didn't. That made me think about how others look at our line of work, and I feel the best way to explain it is through asking a handful of practitioners about their journey and how their work look like. Who are you and what do you do now?
My name's Alex, and I currently am the data engineering chapter lead for HelloFresh. What a chapter lead means, so very specifically at HelloFresh, especially a couple of years ago, kind of all data engineering tasks kind of went through a single team. And the idea was they would just be the data engineers here at HelloFresh. As an organization reaches a certain scale, the data engineering requests start being fairly domain specific, and having this one team kind of jumping between a marketing request or a product analytics request, they kind of lose that domain ownership and kind of knowing about the specific products that they're building towards. So instead, we decided to cut up the data engineers so that we have these cross-functional teams, and so that each team is really able to work with their business domain and produce something that's appropriate for marketing or that's appropriate for the supply chain. And then what happens there is that we end up with data engineers kind of spread out throughout multiple teams. And so this chapter lead role is really meant to help unify them and to help ensure that one team isn't completely building the same thing that another team is building, or that they're heading off in very different directions. So it's kind of this unifying role, working with all the teams and making sure that everyone has a kind of unified vision, while one team never really blocks another.
Makes sense. How do you become a data engineer? What was your journey?
Yeah, so I was a front end engineer originally, kind of a JavaScript specialist really early on. And when I joined Shopify, that's what I was doing. I was a front end engineer and helped building the admin interface. And then we wrapped up this really big project that took 2 years of development, and it got wrapped up, and the team sort of splintered off. There was kind of new teams being developed, and the one I was working on was more or less disappearing. And at the time, there was this new data initiative, and we had no idea why this was being kicked off. We would later learn that it was happening because the company was going to IPO, and they needed to get a lot of their data in line to meet certain financial regulations, so that they were building a data warehouse. They had something already, but they wanted to kind of rebuild it, build it on top of Spark, and kind of try to keep up with big data, which was the word of the day at the time. So yeah, we started on this really small team. I think there was 7 or 8 of us. I had no experience in data stuff going into this. All of these words were new to me, and they gave me a book on data modeling and a book on Hadoop sysops, and kind of went with it from there. I think their thing at the time was they were going to take data modeling concepts that had been proven to work for years. So that was kind of dimensional modeling aspect of it, and kind of try to follow that classically, but build it on top of these up and coming tools. And Spark at the time, I think, was 1.3 or 1.4. And so to use Spark and RDDs at the time to build out a classical dimensionally modeled data warehouse.
What are the projects or tools or trends that do excite you?
The biggest tool that has followed me around has been Spark, right? Like it's at the core of what Shopify was doing. It's at the core of what HelloFresh is doing. So without a doubt, I've always thought that it's like a great core build up on. But I think the interesting stuff today, we have some tools that have kind of just survived ever since the Hadoop days, that I think are finally starting to meet their end of life, and we're starting to get really cool alternatives to them. One that I'm looking at right now, I haven't had the chance to put it in production, is a tool called Marquez that was originally built at WeWork, and it's this idea of just metadata management and trying to keep track of where your data sets are, your data lineage and versioning. We've really relied on kind of the Hive Metastore to be a way to understand where data exists across a data lake. And I'm really excited that there are new tools in this space, and that they're adding things like lineage and versioning that a lot of old metadata tools really didn't have. So that's one that I think is really cool and exciting.
Thank you.
And speaking of data quality, the other big one that we're really looking into is Great Expectations. I think that's kind of taken the industry by storm in the last, a year and a bit, but it really hits that sweet spot of integrating with a lot of the most popular tools, being really easy to work with, giving you something actionable really quickly. I think Great Expectations is really cool because it adds on to an existing platform pretty easily, where a lot of other tools kind of demand really big buy-in. So I
Mhm.
like that a lot about Great Expectations.
How do you see the role of data engineering changing in the coming years?
I think a lot of it is around that, like with so many managed tools and big cloud offerings, these really deeply integrated systems that are being sold by vendors, a lot of it is picking the right tool for the organization, right? Like a huge part
Mhm.
becomes in pointing everyone to some kind of tool set that is going to be compatible and that is going to survive, changing trends over time. And definitely a lot of it is also about making groups of tools work together, right? Like there's so much of this job. Glue engineering isn't really the best, but you have where the company was on their data system and you have where they want to go. And those
Mhm.
transitions are big and long. And you always have to make sure that whatever new thing you're trying, it integrates well and you're not creating complete data silos or making
Mhm.
a bunch of data assets just unavailable because there was a shift in
Mhm.
technology or a trend shift. And so it's a lot about encapsulating a lot of these tools and kind of offering unified access and unified ways of working with data as it appears across an organization.
Thank you. And what piece of advice would you give the newcomers?
I think strong software engineering skills are always just like a really big help, and they help push along. And similarly, operations sit and like understanding modern DevOps practices. But I think the best tip, especially for somebody who's just starting out, is to find somebody that they can learn from. Right? Like if
Mhm.
you're looking to pick the next organization you want to work for, I think more important maybe than the stack or the kind of cool tools that they have or how forward looking they are is really just, is there somebody within the organization who you can learn a lot from? I had the luck of having that really early on in my career, and that drove it far more than the company or the technology stack. It's having somebody who is experienced in the domain and who is able to share some of that experience through code review, through just meetings and sessions. And the amount you pick up from that is just really hard to match anywhere else.
Do you listen to music while you are in the flow?
Big music person while I'm working. It's difficult now in a role that's a little bit more management and a lot
Uh-huh.
of meetings, but when I do get the opportunity, I have a deep Spotify playlist, tons of house music without lyrics because I can't really
Mhm.
do lyrics while I'm
Mhm.
working. But yeah, if I'm writing code or even reviewing code, definitely need to have something playing in my ears.
Back to your native environment. What was the food that you craved the most?
There was one I really wanted to have, and unfortunately it was closed. But in Quebec, there's this place called Casse Croûtes, and it's really just a place that sells hot dogs and French fries, but they're
Mhm.
done in a very specific way.
Yes.
And nothing I wanted more. And unfortunately, due to COVID this year, they closed a month early for their winter close, and I just missed them by a couple of weeks. So that was a real disappointing. As we drove up here, because we're out in the woods up here, and they're just a
Mhm.
little shack along the road,
Mhm.
and they had that little sign out that said closed for the winter, and that was really too bad.
Thank you for the chat. If you are a data engineer and you feel like sharing your story, reach out. I'd be happy to chat with you.
#I, data engineer.